The Race to World First is one of the largest spectacles in modern day World of Warcraft, where you will watch the best guilds in the world all compete against each other to see who can clear the new raid as fast as possible. To the average player, they just watch these guilds compete and enjoy it, but for many people, much like myself, you may wonder, how hard is that actually? That's why this tier I set out with my guild of 20 mostly classic WoW players to see exactly what it is like to Mythic raid, and see is it even fun to begin with. For a broader view of our team, a few players in here have gotten cutting edge before, a few expansions ago, which is the achievement that you get for completing the whole raid on Mythic difficulty. But for the large majority of our team, this is our first time ever seriously Mythic raiding. For this video, I wanted to break down exactly what it took for us to accomplish our most difficult challenge thus far, defeating Mythic Mugsy, the second to last boss in the Liberation of Undermine. For starters, the first thing that you want to do on any raid boss is discuss your strategy. Every boss has different mechanics, and for Mugsy, there was a lot of assignments that we had to go through. There are different jails that you need to place players in throughout the fight, and I needed to assign those players to jails as our raid leader. I, of course, made the mistake of going through every single jail that we would be assigning people to throughout the whole fight on our very first raid. Now, although this sounds like a good idea, what I started to realize very quickly is that it was a colossal waste of time. Most people are visual learners, and we would not see the second phase for dozens of pulls, so all this information at the start is probably useless. Nevertheless, it is important to be prepared. Now, it is worth mentioning there is a lot of preparation that goes in before even pulling the boss. There are a lot of add-ons that we need to install and weak auras that we need to set up. It's all, quite frankly, a pretty big pain in the butt, so I'm not going to waste your time with it. Let's just get into our very first pull of the boss. So we're going to pull him over in a normal spot. Oh, also these drones have a shield now, and they can't be killed, so don't even worry about hitting them right now. They can only be killed if we hit them with finger guns. So everyone stack up here. Get underneath the boss. We're going to beat the mines. I get in close. And then we're just going to run away here. And then Allie's going to pop first. And then Hoki would get bopped, and he's going to pop 1, 2, 3. So everybody's soaking right now. Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, so that went really well. You might be wondering, okay, how on earth are these guys ever going to kill this boss? Well, the answer is a lot of practice. For starters, you can hear me discussing a little bit of our strategy going into the fight. Now, what ended up wiping our raid right there is there are a bunch of mines that this boss spawns underneath his feet. On heroic difficulty, basically anyone can pop one of these mines, which will send out a scatter of circles that each of our players needs to stand in to prevent damage to the raid. If even one of these circles does not end up getting soaked, it can wipe the entire group. But on Mythic difficulty, these mines hit significantly harder when you pop them, meaning ideally you want to have one of your tanks popping them. Our plan at the beginning was to have one of our tanks pop the first mine, and then have our other tank pop all of the rest of them with a bop. Bop stands for Blessing of Protection, which basically will just prevent the tank from getting knocked back. Unfortunately, what we ended up finding out is that these mines hit even so hard that they were threatening our tanks. Luckily, we had a backup plan. Instead, we were going to use our paladins to pop the mines instead. Now, the reason we can have our paladins pop the mines is because they have an invulnerability, meaning they will have a brief window to run through as many mines as they would like without taking any damage. Now, in most groups, they have a protection paladin do this, but unfortunately, we don't have one of those. The reason protection paladins are better is because their cooldown on their invulnerability is much lower. This is nice because you can have one person practice popping the mines more frequently. However, because we don't have that, we have to have 2 players alternating popping the mines for each set, which adds an extra layer of difficulty. I've got to say that this is one of the more frustrating things that we've encountered while Mythic raiding. You see, for these Race to World First guilds, they can take any class that they want, because they always have a player who can play it. But for a casual guild like us, you really have to work with what you got. So while it wasn't ideal for us to have 2 separate people popping mines on different occasions, it unfortunately was our best option. Now, these mines will actually be widely considered as one of the hardest parts of this fight, because as we mentioned early on, they hit really freaking hard. If any of our players who are not intended to run into these mines, it is basically an instant wipe for the entire group. It will 100% kill that player, and if we're not prepared for the soaks and the damage that go out with it, the rest of the group will likely fall with them. It seems like an easy enough game of don't run into the mines, but when you got this thick-ass ogre in your face, it can be kinda difficult for melee players. Not to mention, you need to run around to grab the soaks, and while running, you could just bump right into one. We're not even factoring in that if we pop the mines too fast, it'll be nearly impossible to get all the soaks, plus the damage that they deal to the entire raid will be too much to heal through. Anyway, yeah, these mines suck, but we'll get back to those later. After dealing with these mines, you immediately get a group soak that needs to go out afterwards. This soak will leave what they call a hot mess on the floor. If there are not 5 players inside this soak when it goes off, it will kill the entire raid. So immediately after doing all of those mine soaks, we then will have a designated group of players who are in charge of soaking this hot mess. Now, this first group of players is what we call our immune soakers. This is basically anyone in the group who has an immunity that they can use to deflect the damage from this ability. Now it's very important that only these players are inside of this first soak for later on in the fight. And finally, after that is done, we just get a couple of frontals that don't really matter, and then we are through the first part of this fight. Whew, are you keeping up? Doesn't sound too bad yet, right? You know, that's exactly what I thought going into this fight, but something I learned from Mythic raiding is that sometimes bosses are a lot more difficult than they seem. The first phase on this boss is actually rather simple. That being said, what makes it so difficult is that there are just so many things that can go wrong that can instantly wipe the group. If one person is not paying attention for half a second, suddenly the entire fight is over. And because this first phase is so simple and rather boring, it's very easy to just kind of lose focus for a second and wipe the raid. This is something we are going to become all too familiar with. But we still got more to cover. Now, after we've dealt with all these mechanics, we need to swap Muggsy to the right side of the room, which is going to give him all new mechanics. The first of which is going to be these jails that he puts out. He's going to target 2 random members of the raid who will now spawn a goon. This goon has a sizable amount of health, and you're going to need a couple of your raid members designated to taking it down. These goons are also going to spawn walls for you to use to block these icicles that will go out during this phase as well. So while some members of your raid are dealing with these goons, the other members of your raid are going to be fighting the boss and trying to neutralize these icicles by kiting them around the walls of the jails that have spawned from the goons. Now each icicle will break 1 wall, which means that if 2 players are hiding behind the same wall, there's potential for one of them to just get absolutely annihilated. Not quite as bad as the mine mechanic that we were talking about earlier, but also a silent killer, because if one player dies to these icicles, it's pretty much a wipe for the group. Not to mention, an additional mechanic with these icicles is that they will give you frozen feet, and the only way to clear these frozen feet is to step into the molten lava from the hot mess. That's kind of the whole theme of this fight, is that the different mechanics from the different sides interact with each other. Now, this part of the fight isn't particularly as threatening as the other side, but there are some little nuances to it that make it pretty difficult. For example, if everyone isn't in the same spot when the icicles spawn, there's a chance that you could get a rogue icicle coming from a different direction that can really complicate things. If these icicles hit any players, they will get immediately a one-shot. We had a bit of difficulty getting people to all be in the same exact spot at the same time. Most of this had to do with our melee players wanting to maximize their DPS and hit the boss the entire time, which in their defense was a flaw in our strategy. We need to be tanking the boss a little bit closer to the hot mess to make sure that our DPS can maximize their uptime. This is exactly why in the future we ended up moving the boss a little bit closer and changing how we handled the tank frontal. The tank frontal is this molten gold knuckles attack that he will use on our tank that will then spawn a bunch of molten gold under that tank's feet that they need to kite out. Now we tried a couple of different strategies with this, but we'll talk about it later when it becomes a bigger issue. For now though, that's pretty much all you need to know about the dirt side. After we've dealt with all these mechanics, we will get one last frontal, which we need to aim at those shocker ads that are on the other side, and this will break their shield, allowing us to kill them before we switch over back to the metal side. One note with this specific frontal is that it hits really freaking hard, and oftentimes we would just end up losing players to it. Afterwards though, the fight actually just repeats. We go back to the metal side and we do the mines again, and then we do the frontals, and then we swap back over to the dirt side eventually. This time, however, we have to deal with an additional mine in this set, meaning more soaks and more damage. This set of mines was also particularly difficult for us because we had to have a different paladin popping these mines than they were the first time. This is due to the fact that their bubble was still on cooldown. As we mentioned earlier, with a protection paladin, their bubble will be up for every set of mines, so they can get away with just having one person do this. And this is important because the timing in which that you pop the mines is very critical. But for us, it's basically like a whole new person now needs to learn this mechanic, further increasing the difficulty of the fight. What's even worse is that we initially had our holy paladin popping the second set, which is bad because he needs to be healing, so if he's going to do one of the sets, he should probably do the first one. It just took us a while to figure this out though. Finally, one added layer of difficulty to these mines is that you need to pop them fast enough so that your group is fully clear to go and handle this group soak immediately afterwards. If you space out the mines too much, then you run into a situation where people are running around trying to soak while they need to be in this big group soak. And every member of your raid who was not in that first hot mess needs to be in this new one right now. Otherwise, this can create some major issues in the last phase. So you want to pop the mines fast enough so that your group is cleared up to handle this soak, but you don't want to do them too fast where it's going to wipe the group. It's a very hard balance. I also don't want to undersell how difficult it was for people to not just run into these mines on accident. This second set is even more difficult than the first one, and the first one isn't necessarily easy. On either one of these sets, it's very possible to lose at least one player, which normally results in a wipe. and accidentally popping a mine is almost an instant wipe. So if we're not able to execute this perfectly every time, it's going to be very difficult for us to progress this boss. Coincidentally though, we did have one very early pull where we executed this perfectly. We managed to soak all of the mines, do the hot mess, and get to the next set of jails with everyone alive. This allowed us to get a 28% attempt on our 33rd pull of the boss. Now, while stuff like that can be exciting, on a boss like this, it's actually kind of rough, because it provides that illusion that you were close to killing the boss, when in reality, there is so much left to progress. After this attempt, we didn't even see the second phase for another 29 pulls. I think part of this has to do with the fact that about halfway through our raid night, I have noticed that we start to get a little bit sloppy. And that's just the very human factor of raiding, is that for most players, it's really hard to stay focused for 3 hours straight. As the night goes on, it just becomes easier and easier to mess up. And actually, our next best pull was on a completely different day at the start of the raid. For me, this has become one of the more difficult problems that I don't know how to get around as a raid leader. It does feel like once we get about halfway through the night, there is no chance that we are going to get a kill sometimes. It feels like everything after that point is just meant to be practice. Our progression on this boss was not easy. It took place over the course of an entire month. Twice a week, we would come in and wipe to this boss for 3 hours at a time, because for players of our skill level, the fight was just that difficult. I do think that there's something that's awesome about that though, having a group of 20 people who are all progressing to the same goal over the course of an entire month. There are obviously other areas of life where you'll experience that, like in work, but in terms of gaming, you just don't really get that from any other game. Now that we have progressed all the way through phase 1 though successfully, a lot of these pulls just came down to cleaning things up. We were still losing people to basically every single mechanic that we possibly could. People were still dying to icicles, people were still dying to mines, they were dying to the gold dust on the floor. And for us to kill this boss, it became about min-maxing every single part of the fight that we possibly could. For example, something that we realized as we started progressing phase 2 more and more was that our strategy for dealing with the gold knuckles was not working. We were ending up with gold exactly where we needed to run during the intermission, and it was resulting in deaths. What we eventually tried to do to counteract this was have our warrior use their human racial inside of the hot mess to drop the golden puddle off in the corner. And while this was slightly better, it still resulted in the same issue for us. We still had gold exactly where we needed to run. This is where I feel like my lack of research as a raid leader really became an issue. If I had done more research on the fight, I should have known how they were dealing with this gold, but I didn't really. The solution that we ended up using is that you can actually drop this gold over to the left side of the arena, and it'll end up disappearing before it ever becomes an issue. But because I didn't know that the gold disappeared, it actually created a lot of problems for our group. Which kind of sucks, because that is definitely something that's my job to know. Moving into phase 2 though, this is where the fight gets significantly more difficult. To start out the phase, after he does these 3 charges, what he's going to do is drop down a bunch more mines. Once again, this time dropping an additional mine compared to last time. Now, because we already had so many issues with these mines in the past, what our plan was is we were just going to root these mines and try to ignore them. If these mines stay alive for too long, then they will enrage after a minute and they will start chasing down our players and be unCCable. But if we could kill the boss before those mines reach our players, then there was potential for us to not have to deal with this mine set at all. And again, because we had so many issues with the first 2 sets, adding an additional mine made this really scary, and that's why we decided to try to skip it. After we spawn the mines, we'll get targeted by icicles again, and a couple players will then need to go LOS on top of the mines instead of the walls this time. The icicles will freeze the mines instead of hitting the player. Then after executing this, we need to go run and set up 4 jails this time. These 4 jails are set up by a weak aura, and we had a lot of issues during our prog trying to figure this out. Just one slight miscommunication between people in jails could potentially wipe even some of our best pulls ever. It was really disheartening. One time we had a pull going into the jails where everyone was alive and the boss was giga low, only to have our weak aura mess up and assign 2 players to the same jail and wipe our raid instantly. These jails are by far the hardest part of the fight, not only because everyone needs to go to their correct assignment, but also because during this jail set, we are going to get another hot mess soak. This is why it's so important that everyone is in the correct soaks during the first phase, because if you are in the last hot mess, that means that you are not an eligible target for this one. That's important because we only want this hot mess to be able to target our immunity soakers in these specific jails. This fight becomes so difficult because during this last phase, you just need everything to go right for you to kill the boss. Luckily, if we are able to successfully make it out of these jails with everyone alive, then the fight is nearly over. Or so you would think. The concern I started to have was that we might not actually have the damage to kill the boss before these mines reach us. We had a ton of pulls getting the boss down to 16 or 17%, which ends up being like a lot of HP. I started doing the math for some of it, and I estimated that on some of our best pulls, it would take us another full minute after getting out of the jails to kill the boss. But the main problem is that we hadn't gotten through the jails with everyone alive yet. We hadn't gotten to the point where every single person could jump back onto the boss and start cranking damage. It kind of became a dilemma for myself because if we chose to deal with that last set of mines and pop them like we did the first two, then it would buy us like a full extra minute for the fight. Even if we lost 1 or 2 players during this mindset, it's possible that we could kill the boss afterwards because we have so much extra time. But by ignoring it, was I possibly setting up our raid for a task that we just couldn't possibly do? It gets a little scary because as we're 200 pulls into the boss, if we have to go back and relearn phase 2 because our strat isn't working, I feel like that could absolutely crush the guild. But like I said, we never made it through the jails with everyone alive, so that's what we had to figure out first. The other thing that we needed to start doing was optimizing our damage. At the start of the fight, what is standard is for players to use things like tempered pots to boost their damage. However, tempered pots have a 5-minute cooldown and the intermission occurs at 4 minutes. Not to mention, all of our damage in the first phase didn't really matter. Because the boss phase is at 40% flat, that means that we need to fit in as much damage as possible during that 40% so that we can kill him before those mines in raid. With this in mind, we asked all of our raiders to not use tempered pots at the start of the fight, which is actually rather annoying for their damage. I also actively tried to delay our side swaps to make sure that we had enough time between the fight so that our 2-minute cooldowns came up right at the start of the intermission. And then there are other buffs that we can use on our players. For example, Power Infusion is a very contested buff in the raid that everybody wants. It benefits everyone, but it benefits some people just a little bit more. That's why I went through our logs and tried to see who was doing the most damage during Bloodlust. If you look it up, then a lot of the times you'll see that Devastation Evokers are some of the best people to use PI on, but my knowledge on the class was that their mastery caused them to do more damage the higher health the target is. And because we're focusing on the last percentage of the boss's health, they're probably one of the worst people to PI in these cases. In this case, we chose to PI our BM Hunter and our Unholy Death Knight. And this is all in the name of just squeaking out a little bit of extra damage. On top of all of this, we asked our healers to start DPSing as well more frequently. As a healer, their job is to keep the group alive, but oftentimes they can do a decent amount of damage, especially during moments where the fight isn't as healing intensive. Finally, we did other things, like when those people ran away with the ice spears, we tried to keep the boss closer so that they could continue to DPS while they're doing that. Now, don't get me wrong, for a group of experienced players, they probably don't need to worry about as much of this at this point in the phase. The boss has been nerfed to all hell, and there's a lot of players who could probably just smoke this boss whenever they want. But for us, as I mentioned, we don't have that same experience. Despite the nerfs, we have never fought a boss this difficult before. And it was really fun for us that we were able to problem solve and experiment with this fight based on our skill level. After the race to World First, there was tons of complaints about this raid's tuning. Everyone was saying it's too easy, and for some players that's obviously true. But I've got to say, for our guild, this felt like really awesome. It felt like all of the fights had some sort of difficulty to them, but they also felt doable for us. It was a raid that while progressing, it felt like we actually had a chance. We may have started this fight with everyone dying instantly, but by our final night of progression, we had this shit down. Every single pull was getting deep into the second phase. It was only a matter of time until we killed this boss. And then finally, after 230 pulls on this boss, we did it.
We're on boss. Move the boss to the corner. Everyone stack on top of him. Not stand in the middle of the room. Look and see if a mine is fixating you. You'll have a little weak aura like right next to your character.
External.
Yeah, watch the Shiki. Watch the Shiki. Every cooldown on him. Mines are going to enrage here in 2 seconds.
Flame in 8.
2 minutes are coming up right now. Minutes? Keep kiting it. Mines are enraged right now. Kite it out. If you are fixated, you kite. You kite right now. No. Watch whoever's fixated by that. It's Ska.
So, fuck.
Let's go!
Let's go!
Oh my god.
Good job, guys.
Fucking
Dude, I had
it.
a heart attack. I was not looking at the fucking boss's HP, and I thought we wiped.
After 230 pulls, we finally did it. I gotta say, this is one of the coolest gaming experiences I've ever had, and I'm so glad I got to do it with such an amazing group of people. If you guys enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe to the channel down below. I would love to make more stuff like this in the future. And other than that, I will see you in the next one.